Good afternoon. My name is Mertad Hariri. I'm the CEO and President of the Canadian Science Policy Centre. Welcome you to today's sessions as part of the Canadian Science Policy Centre's Innovation Strategy virtual series. First, I would like to acknowledge the land that I am today speaking to you from Ottawa, which is the unceded, unsurrounded territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin nations, whose presence here reaches back to the immemorial. The Innovation Strategy series are dedicated to exploring how Canada's innovation policies and strategies can adapt to the rapidly evolving global landscape. Our focus today is on the agriculture and agri-food sector, the cornerstone of Canada's economy and a vital contributor to global food security. This sector is currently navigating a complex array of challenges, including shifting geopolitical dynamics, evolving trade relationships, climate change pressure, and rapid technological advancement. To delve into these critical issues, we are honored to have a fantastic line of panelists here, and the panel will be moderated by Senator Mary Robinson as the moderator of the panel. Senator Robinson brings a wealth of experience, having been a strong advocate for the agriculture industry at the provincial and national level and global levels. A proud Prince Edward Islander, Senator Robinson was appointed to the Senate in January 2024. Coming from sixth-generation family farm operations, she has been a strong voice for industry at the provincial and national level. She was the first female chair of the Canadian Agricultural Human Resources Council, the first female president of the Canadian Federation of Agriculture, and vice president of the World Farmers Organizations. In 2021, she was named as one of the top 25 most powerful women in Atlantic Canada by the Atlantic Business Magazine. Senator Robinson, thank you for joining us, and the virtual stage is yours.
Thank you, Merdad. Thank you for the very kind remarks. And I want to start by welcoming everyone. Thank you for joining us for this, which is the first of a series the Canadian Science Policy Centre has launched. And as Merdad said, the objective today is we're going to take a dive into the topic of navigating geopolitical shifts with a focus on Canada's innovation strategy for agriculture and agri-food. I'm really excited to welcome you and joining me today with our six impressive guests. Each of our guests brings extensive experience with different perspectives, and I think it's going to lead us through a very interesting conversation. It is our hope to host this stimulating conversation on innovation challenges and opportunities in agriculture and agri-food, and to explore how industry and innovation policy can adapt to strengthen Canada's competitive standing and ensure Canadians are on solid footing. We will be taking questions through the Q&A feature, which I think you can all find that on the bottom of your screen. And the chat line is also available. So if you're experiencing any kind of technical difficulties, or if you just have a general question, if you put that in the chat function, that's what that will be used for exclusively. And we're going to be upvoting. So if you have a question that you would like to pose, please look for the questions that are being posed in the Q&A feature. And if you see your question has already been asked, the best way to elevate that to get it asked is to upvote it. So that's a great feature that we can use to make sure that we hone in on what's really top of mind for the audience, for you folks. So now let's dive right into it. I want to start by introducing our six panelists. We have Joe Dales, and Joe is the co-founder and partner of RHA Ventures, Inc. We have Ian Affleck, fellow Prince Edward Islander and Vice President of Biotechnology at CropLife Canada. Kathleen Sullivan, VP of Government Relations, Maple Leaf Foods. Rodney Byerhusen, and Rodney, I should have checked with you before. I hope I said that right. You can correct me later. President of Sunrise Greenhouses Limited, a fantastic sector. Steve Webb, CEO of Global Institute for Food Security, GIFTS. And if anybody has a chance to visit him, he puts on a great tour, I can tell you. And Stephanie Stevenson, who is the CMO with Protein Industries Canada. So we're going to dive right in here because we've got a lot of ground to cover, and I want to make sure we give lots of time for our panelists to answer the questions. And at the end, if we have enough time left over, we will go to those Q&A questions that people are putting in the Q&A feature. So we're going to start with our first question. And what I'm going to do after the asking the question is I'm going to ask Tiffany, Joe, and Steve, probably go in that order, to share their responses. And if we've got time after that, because we're going to take about 15 minutes here, if we have time after that, then we're going to ask our other panelists to weigh in and give questions as well. And then we'll move on to the next question. So we have 4 questions to make our way through before we get to the next part of this webinar. So the first question, considering the geopolitical shift, tariffs, and a new dimension into the Canadian economy, what are the top 3 challenges currently hindering innovation in your sector? So I'm going to go first to Tiffany.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you to CSPC for hosting this webinar today. So I'm going to speak from the role of Protein Industries Canada, where we're working to advance innovation in plant-based food, feed, and ingredients. And so that's going to be the lens of which I'll answer this question specifically to the challenges. I think we probably all agree that the current geopolitical situation has probably increase the lens on some of these challenges and brought them to the forefront, but also to the positive. I think there's a lot more interest in bringing solutions forward, and I think this is a great time to have that conversation. So from Protein Industries Canada's perspective and ingredient manufacturing, we think one of the greatest barriers to innovation in Canada right now is really related to innovation infrastructure, and specifically going from pilot processing to commercial scale. There's a gap there on toll processing. And what that means when you're an innovator is that we have some great pilot processing facilities, whether it's the food development centers or academic institutions, but there's a big gap when you're moving to commercial scale. And right now, those facilities are only located in the United States. And that means we're risking losing our innovative companies. We're risking losing that IP. It's increased chance of being commercialized in the United States. So when we look at innovation from across the spectrum, we have to be able to support those companies from true pilot innovation through to commercialization and commercializing that IP in Canada. And a big part of that, of course, is infrastructure. I think the other challenge that's facing our sector right now, and it's probably not just our sector, but it is access to late stage capital. So there's a lot of great programming, such as Protein Industries Canada, to help early stage innovation in Canada. But there's a gap when we're talking about commercialization and supporting companies through that process. And so especially when we're talking here about brick and steel in the ground, that requires a large investment. And right now that capital isn't flowing to support some of that scale up in Canada. And so again, we see companies leaving to where that capital is flowing, perhaps where there's more incentives for some of that construction to happen. So in order to keep that IP and commercialization in Canada, it's accessing some of those capital dollars. And then of course also to enter export markets, because you need to be able to generate a product and export and diversify. And I think the third piece I'll highlight quickly, and this is really, what Protein Industries Canada has been working on, is collaborative innovation along the value chain. Canada's agri-food sector is incredibly strong. It is what makes our sector so competitive globally. But I don't know, from an innovation perspective, we've always looked at it as a whole, and sometimes innovation is siloed. Instead of looking at from perhaps, genetics to farm gate to finished food processor, and how if we're more collaborative on innovation across all parts of the value chain, if we could be more effective. So that's the first 3 I would put out there for discussion, but thank you.
Super, great. And we'll move into our next. And I've lost track of who our next is.
It's probably
Joe.
me.
Yes.
Thanks.
Okay, Joe. And what I'll do, Joe, is when you get 30 seconds left, I'm going to put my hand up just to keep us. I'm going to be a taskmaster here.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you, Senator Robinson. From my perspective, I've had the pleasure of working in the private sector for my whole career, first with a lot of the large life science companies and seed companies, then as an entrepreneur starting ag careers on farms.com. And then now we invest in early stage ag and food tech companies. So that's kind of the perspective I'm going to bring to this question. The major challenge is uncertainty, and the Trump tariff, I would say chaos, because we aren't sure one day to the next what the rules of engagement are, is very disruptive on small business right through to the farmers. Most farmers don't know what the commodity price is going to be because it's so chaotic. So farmers are farmers. They're going to keep doing what they're doing, and they'll be creative in their problem solving moving forward. The result of the chaos has been investment in venture capital, for all stages of the sector. I work in the early, small, innovative stage, has been frozen. Organizations, it's hard to deploy when we don't know what the rules of engagement are going to be. So that's been a huge challenge that we need to, focus on overcoming. And then I guess the last challenge, farmers are very good at adopting innovation. We know if there's good technology from around the world, the farmers like Rodney will find it and bring it home and adopt it. The larger the disruption, the greater the investment, the harder it is for them to take that risk. So if we can find ways of helping them de-risk some of the future investments, it might be robotics, it might be technology, things like that are probably good investments for supporting our farmers and supporting our early stage companies. So I'm excited about the future, but the Trump chaos and crisis has certainly forced us to assess how we go to market and how we conduct things.
Thank you, Joe. Steve, do you want to weigh in here?
Great. Thank you, Senator. And again, thank you for allowing me to be on this panel. It's good to be third because a lot of what I was going to say is kind of already mentioned. And I just want to highlight a few. As Joe mentioned, uncertainty is terrible for innovation, regardless of who is doing it. Because again, there's a significant amount of risk in any innovative process. Not everything works. And how do you minimize the risk to the technology and the business opportunity itself without the added geopolitical confusion that's out there today? One area that I think is really important that we've not really talked about yet is regulatory and the regulatory framework. And I'm looking at Ian, and I know he's going to jump on that. But again, I think when we look at a innovative ecosystem, one that has a regulatory framework that is predictable, transparent, science-based, allows us to look at and drive innovation. I think it's an opportunity for Canada to have a regulatory framework that allows us to attract investment. We have a great country to be able to, we have a sandbox of a country in a certain way to be able to test lots of different things, but our regulatory framework today is a hindrance to being able to do that. I want to riff off of something Tiffany said about lack of scale up. I think one of the challenges in the ag and food space is we need to be thinking about scale up and cost of goods right at the very beginning of the innovation process. So those early stage TRLs. One thing that I mentioned in our pre-meeting was that the innovation problem is not due to the current political landscape, tariffs. We have an innovation problem in Canada already, and it's just exacerbated by what Joe had mentioned. And again, we make big investments in research, but we do not do a good job, as Tiffany mentioned, investing down the innovation pipeline to allow those inventions to translate into market impacting innovation. And again, another thing that, again, Tiffany and I are both in Saskatchewan, and the other thing I want to echo is that a fragmented approach to innovation and collaboration. Again, Tiffany mentioned the opportunity to work up and down the entire value chain. Totally agree with that. I think we need to think about new ways in which we drive innovation as part of the solution. So the three issues: regulation, insufficient investment in the development and scale up side, and a fragmented approach to innovation and collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks to the three of you. Now I'm going to just open it up for a couple minutes here. Anybody of our other three panelists want to weigh in here? I know, Steve, you thought Ian might jump in. Oh, look, there it is. Ian.
Yeah, I can jump off that, but I'm sure Kathleen will too, as she's got a lot of regulatory expertise in her portfolio as well. But I think I like the way that Steve described it. Is often when we talk about regulation, we're just thinking about the cost of it or the details or the time, but it's about uncertainty. At the end of the day, that the change in cost is uncertainty. Where's your regulatory system trending? Is it getting more expensive? Is it getting faster? Is it getting slower? And I think what we've seen in the last, decade and more is that we're seeing a slide in regulatory performance. And Senator Robinson, one of your colleagues, Senator Deakin, had wrote a great paper a few years ago highlighting what the OECD pointed out, that we had fallen to, I think it was 38 or 36 out of 38 or 39 out of 46, or depending on when you look at the numbers, not good in the bottom quarter of OECD countries for regulatory performance. And that's a huge disincentive to bring products to Canada. Maybe just an example from our sector at the PMRA, the Pest Management Regulatory Agency, Category A products. That's the brand new stuff. That's the newest and most, the coolest things that our sector is bringing to market. Used to be above 90% of the time they were hitting their targets for regulatory approvals. Now they're down into the low 70s. That's a massive problem. And what we're hearing from our companies is now we used to be one of the top 5 countries to get a product approved in, even though we're a very small market. We often think of Canada as a huge agricultural player, but on a global scale, we're actually a smaller market if you think we don't grow crops for 6 months of the year. So there's a lot of products that can be moved in other countries. And now we're falling down into the teens and in the 20s before someone brings a product here to get approved. So back, it's that uncertainty piece that Steve spoke of. And then if I was to give, I don't want to just all say, you can't just say it's all the government's fault. What's industry doing about it? But I also have a soft spot for regulation. I was a regulator for many years. It's a tough time to get momentum as a government to really take on regulatory reform in the face of chemophobia and the Make America Healthy Again movement and every single thing you're seeing out there. It's really tough as a government to say, hey, we're going to have an industry workshop and talk about solutions to regulatory barriers. Like, I feel for them there, but it's how do we get to a bravery point where we're going to stand up for science and scientific approaches and really have a discussion on that. Now, maybe I'll segue that to Kathleen, because I'm sure she's got
I do.
more to say in that realm.
Yeah, I'm getting itching here. I am to me, regulation and innovation really go together. And I don't know that if you're outside of a company or somebody who looks at this every day, you really get it. Regulations are like this heavy weighted blanket that goes on to a company. And it skews how you look at everything. It takes resources away. And I'm not against regulation, quite the opposite. It is, as a company in particular that exports a lot, our regulatory system and the strength of our regulatory system helps us in terms of the Canadian image. But you just need the regulations you need. And we seem to have this philosophy in Canada, and we have had for many years, if not decades, that we have to do it our way. We can't, build off other countries. And it often feels like the food industry is just targeted. It's like a regulatory target. We're just going to add regulation, never sort of take regulation away. And I really do think a lot of companies are at this sort of breaking point, especially in the context of what happened with the US, because that really did destabilize, as people are saying. And for example, in my company, we put together, like I'm sure many others, a crisis management team to deal with tariffs. And that drew from our senior executive level for almost 3 months, a whole cohort of valuable staff who really did nothing but focus on tariffs and modeling and contingency planning and all of that, while still trying to manage new regulations that were coming in. And even in that context, I'll tell you, like we said to the federal government, you've got to stop with regulatory consultations. You've got to put a pause on new regulations, because companies can't do both. There just is not infinite resources within companies. Maintaining food safety, maintaining animal welfare, those things are non-negotiable. That is the entry level of being in this industry. We're talking about everything that goes above that. The other thing I'll say is that, like, Maple Leaf Foods we're a large company here in Canada, relatively small if you think about global companies, but yes, we're considered a large company here in Canada. even we, like, innovation is so many different things. We built a really big, almost $1 billion food plant in London, Ontario. Our engineering team went to over about 50 countries around the world to look at technology and bring the best technology back here to Canada to build this plant. But in doing so, that technology was completely unknown to our regulator. So, we're not doing a good job of connecting those.
Thanks, Kathleen. Rodney, did you want to weigh in here for a quick minute? Sorry. There you go.
Yeah, sorry, you caught me off guard, but I agreed with
Okay.
Stephen and Tiffany on the that we're good on investing in research and innovation, and right now I'm experiencing that as well a little bit. We have several projects on the go with technology from the academic side, the universities, colleges, and finding it a struggle to bring it to market, bridging that gap. And it's that path to market, right? Finding the right partners to work with in terms of bringing AI to market. We're an incubator as well for a company called Bold Robotics, which is a Canadian automation firm for North American agricultural technology. But that's often the challenge is getting those ideas out of the universities and the academics and bringing it to market. So that's a lot of the challenge I'm seeing.
Super. Thank you so much. So we've got our first question under our belt now, and I'm looking at the webinar chat as well as the Q&A, and want to remind people if they have a question. Lauren, I see you put a question in the webinar chat. Could you put that over in the Q&A, and then we'll be able to upvote those as we go along. A reminder to people to put their questions as we go along in the Q&A. And I'm going to move on to our second question. And we're going to be asking Ian, Steve, and Kathleen for their responses on this in that order. And we've got 3 minutes each. So again, I'll raise my hand when you got about 30 seconds left. No pressure. So the question is, how should government and industry respond to these challenges to enable long-term innovation and competitiveness? Ian, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, and I think part of what I was going to say was covered in the previous one. So I think there's a link here. As a regulatory nerd, I often go there first. But I think that idea that we've fallen to one of the lowest competitive countries in the OECD rankings for regulatory burden, that when you go to make an investment in commercialization, you take that into account. Is this a country where I want to take the risk of trying to commercialize? Maybe I'll do my research there, but then I'll commercialize the product somewhere else. So this is why regulations really they send more of a message than just the cost of going through the system. So then what do we do about it? The question being, what does government and what does industry do about it? So I think industry has to coordinate its ask so that it's making a clear request of government. I think sometimes we can get caught up with just saying, it's terrible, and you kind of sit back. It's like we have to come in with proposals. We got to be really clear about what needs to be fixed. One of the questions in the chat was, can you give an example of something that could be removed? And I think the phyllo pastry analogy that was in there is really good. There's that many that almost giving a specific example will be so niche that I don't know how useful it'll be, but maybe I'll zoom it out. Is it that we need to see the government be as innovative in its regulations as we are in the products we're creating, and fighting back against the slippery slope of hazard-based approaches to regulation, of trying to get to a point of zero risk at all times. We can only add more safety regulation, and going, is the juice worth the squeeze on X? Should we do Y? And working with the industry who has, as Kathleen said, like the scientists and the engineers who are traveling the world to get the cutting edge information that they can hand over to government. You don't have to believe us just because we said it, but we can bring you that information for you to take a look at and say, is this the right way? Is this the creative way to take a regulatory approach? So with that, I think where we can work together is, there's been talk of how do you put an additional element into the mandate of regulatory departments so that they understand that it's always safety first. That doesn't change, but it can safety first in the mission of delivering food security. which then brings in a slightly broader secondary lens, which goes, if there's 7 ways to do something, let's pick the one that's the least impactful on the sector that's trying to bring the food to market, rather than if your only focus is on safety only, it's, well, we'll pick the one that's easiest for the department because that's my focus. And it's actually, there's an equally useful way that's better for the sector. So I think that's where, how do we start working together better as industry and government so that we can bring some new ideas to the forefront? And then I think that last piece is, and that's hard to do in an environment with like the Maha stuff coming out of the States. That doesn't make this easier, but that's what I'm hopeful for as we go into a new government, is how do we work together to come up with innovative new proposals?
Thank you, Ian. Steve.
Great, thank you. I think I like everything that Ian said, and one of the things that I want to drill in is innovation's a team sport, and it's not a gotcha sport. It's not where I win and you lose. And we need to be thinking about how do we drive innovation that creates benefit for everyone, from consumers all the way back to the companies that are driving the innovation. At the Global Institute for Food Security, we occupy a unique space in the innovation pipeline. We act as that bridge and connector between industry and academia. Again, as Rodney mentioned, the challenge of how do we take very good inventions to begin to scale up, to be able to not hand them off, but again, that continuum that drives the innovation. One area that we see at GIFS as a real opportunity to sustain innovation and enable long-term competitiveness gets back to the opportunity to collaborate and reimagining how we collaborate. Ian mentioned that we have our agricultural sector globally is relatively small compared to the global opportunity space. One other area that I would mention, particularly here in Western Canada, is the crops really important that feed people directly are relatively low value capture opportunities like wheats, the pulse crops. And where we see an opportunity is how do we bring 21st century technologies to bear on crops that cannot afford to do it only on industry's dime. This is where, again, partnerships between academia, government, and industry are going to be required. And full disclosure, we have a proposal in front of PIC. So Tiffany, thank you for consideration around how do we build such a consortium around yellow peas. This is an opportunity for Canada to stay competitive. Our competitors, the Australians, are deploying accelerated breeding, genomic selection, and speed breeding, and delivering better varieties with higher genetic gain faster than our current breeding organizations are. That is why, with the private sector companies, with the public sector breeders and GIFs, with the support of the growers, we're looking at this consortium model. Again, I think it's a really innovative approach. The technology is proven, but it's a very innovative approach to drive innovation, and I think we need to rethink that. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Kathleen, go ahead.
Yeah, so a couple. I think we have a few challenges here. So first of all, I think our regulators have a tough job. We're very heavily, because we're a meat company, we're sort of at the apex of the amount of inspection you're going to have from CFIA, for example. And that's tough, right? They set policy at the national level, and then it goes down, and ultimately it has to be interpreted by individual inspectors, individual plants under different circumstances, possibly every day. And that's hard. Like, how do you figure out consistency? How do you ensure that interpretation matches national policy? How do you make sure national policy is keeping up with innovation? So I think that's a challenge we have. I think another challenge we've got is that I don't think the federal government, not this political government, but I think in general, and some provincial governments, don't really understand how the agri-food sector works. I think a lot of times they say, we have an agriculture sector, they've done some stuff with farmers, check that box, let's go talk about other things. And I'm sure that a lot of the agriculture community would say that that's maybe not the right approach. And a lot of the other groups along the supply chain are saying, hey, what about us? Like, it's a food system, not an agriculture system. And I think that makes it hard for government to understand, what are we talking about when we talk about regulations, what we need from investment or what we need to support innovation? Because I just don't think that they fully understand the supply chain because that hasn't been made a priority. And I think we create a challenge. And I think as industry, someone else raises, we are overly fragmented. And that makes it virtually impossible to go into government to, as I think Ian, you talked about, lay out priorities and clearly say what we want because there's too many groups going in clearly saying what their constituents want. I think in terms of where government should focus, I do think it's what we talked about. It's regulation, it's investment, recognizing that investment, it's not a homogeneous industry. It's a supply chain with companies of all different sizes at various stages of development. Same thing with primary agriculture and farm inputs. And I think the third piece for me is also integrating that with broader supply chain because we are heavy users of the actual supply chain infrastructure across this country, whether it's ports, it's rail, et cetera. But ultimately, I do agree, Ian, I think it was you who said it, it's going to have to be in partnership with government. We have to figure out a better way because the way we're working, I don't think is working. And I will just quickly, because I picked up the questions, Senator, I can give a specific example of a regulation, and I'm happy to do that in the open discussion.
Super. Thank you, Kathleen. Now open it up if Rodney, Tiffany, or Joe have anything they want to add to this. Or Ian or Steve, if you want to come back. Tiffany, you go ahead.
Yeah, I think I'll just echo what Ian said and what Kathleen said, and Steve may have alluded to too, but really is alignment and coordination within the industry. We were talking specific to regulations, and that's one piece. But I think it's overall, if we want to position the agri-food sector as a key piece of Canada's economy, we want to be viewed as a strategic priority and be aligned for investment. I think as an industry, there's some work to do around coordination. And I know it's easier to say we're geographically diverse, we are product diverse. But at the high level, we all really want the same things, right? Whether it's around regulation that supports business and investment, whether it is that investment that's needed to support scale up and commercialization. And I think there's a lot of opportunity there to being able to really, figure out what our ask is as an industry and how we go in a little bit more coordinated fashion. And I got a lot of hands up there, so.
Okay, I think maybe Rodney, were you first there? Let's go right to you.
I think I have a question directed towards Kathleen and the bigger group. Do you think it's competition between sectors that might be part of the problem?
Interesting.
I think my view, and as some of you will know, I was in the association for a long time. I look at the associations and the producer groups as our governance model as an industry. This is how we've organized ourselves. And I think for different reasons, maybe because of how large Canada is geographically, the variety of issues, just human nature, we seem to organize ourselves smaller and smaller and smaller, as opposed to larger and larger and larger. And I don't speak for the agriculture community. I will say that about the processing community. So, there's a meat association, there's a chicken association, there's a plant-based protein association, there's a national general association, there's provincial general associations. Then there's associations that look at specific issues like sustainability or labor or whatever those are. And I think that we have parsed ourselves out so finely for good reason. I'm not saying there wasn't a justification for that, but I think we have parsed ourselves out so finely that we are unable to kind of put ourselves back together in all cases to lobby around specific issues. Now, that's a general statement. I fully get that. There's absolutely examples of a collaboration within the industry, but we have to put a lot of energy into that. And I'm not sure that always serves us well as industry and serves us well in terms of achieving the goals that we've got.
Super. Ian.
Yeah, I would echo what Kathleen said. And I think, we can't just point the finger at government. We have to look at ourselves as industries and say, how can we do better at providing good information to the government and to senators and others so that they understand what we're looking to do. But I think in that vein, one of the reasons that I think we've gone down that road where it's kind of been more separate is that lately it feels like in the last 5 to maybe 7 years, we've been consulted at instead of consulted with. It's kind of like everything's done by online consultation of generalist policy documents. And it's really hard on complex regulatory science because the regulatory policy is a science in and of itself, is to give really detailed and understand the nuance of the sector where I think we need to go to government as industry and say, no, how you manage this is you need to have a workshop you need to get people sit down, discuss the details. The people in the room need to be the people that are trying to bring innovation to the market. Then you can consult on options with the broader public and with others who may have differences of opinion with the idea of moving. But if you try to consult with the entire populace of Canada and the regulated parties in one convenient 90-day consultation online, that's not an effective way to use the mental capacity of the industries that are in Canada. So, but that changes if we ask for it to change. I don't think we can just sit back and wait. We have to get together and say, you need to work with us differently if we're going to get to some ideas that are going to carry through. So I think because we used to do those kind of things, people could come with their individual voices and bring them all to the room, but then the room disappeared. And now we're left all writing letters into online consultations, which is a hard way to describe a complex regulatory model.
If I could add to that, I was part of the SaaS strategy, and they got ambitious. I found AFC was ambitious in that, and they brought in a lot of players to the table. But then it was a bit unruly because there were a lot of players at the table. So how big do you make the tent, and how do you resource? Because I was involved with the Canadian Federation at that point, and my beef was that we were a small organization with limited resources, and it seemed like a lot of it was being downloaded onto industry. So I hear you that we need to have meaningful consultation, but I challenge all of us to think about how we can tell government meaningful consultation can actually be executed. I haven't seen it done well yet, and I really hope we're going to. Kathleen, we've got about 30 seconds left. Do you want to go?
I do. And I'll just add on to things Ian was saying, and that's that I think what I have experienced, so maybe people tell me I'm wrong, but what I've experienced is a sentiment of distrust towards industry. That you're only there to make money. You don't really care about the context. And I think that's untrue. I would maintain it's untrue for my belief. I think it's untrue for the vast majority of companies that I deal with, my competitors even. And because there's a distrust, what isn't allowed to happen is for companies to come to the table and say, you know what, on some of these policy issues, we're ahead of you. We have actually done more work on plastics, for example, than you really realize. And we have embedded expertise on that. And we are as interested in achieving policy objectives as you are. And those conversations are really hard to have.
Oops, I'm muted. Sorry about that. Okay.
I just want to quadruple support what Kathleen said.
Okay, super.
Excellent.
Upvote. Everybody upvote the questions in the Q&A. Okay, so moving on to our third question. We're doing great here. And we're going to be posing this to Rodney, Kathleen, and Steve to start. And the question is, how can Canada enhance private sector R&D investment and capitalize on emerging opportunities in this sector? Rodney, we're going to start with you.
Thank you, Senator Robson and CSPC Canada for the opportunity to speak to this question. I just want to frame that I'm speaking on behalf of the greenhouse sector and as president of Flowers Canada and several other greenhouse organizations. We represent about $5 billion in annual farm gate value. Recently, RBC released a report and identified Canada greenhouse production as the leader in the world of all greenhouse producing nations in terms of productivity per hectare. The Netherlands being a close second, and that's who we always think of as the leader. That has come through innovation of small family-owned businesses. Every 5 years, our businesses invest the equivalent to an auto plant in Canada, often without heavy subsidies. So to answer the question now, how can Canada enhance private sector R&D investment and capitalize on emerging opportunities in the sector? Well, a few points for concern here. on cost sharing programs. I think that has been vital to our industry in the past. Recently, approvals and payouts have been slow. So we've actually seen researchers moving on from research in our sector. So that's a point of concern that I think needs to be addressed immediately. I think revamping of the tax program, it tailors more towards large business, and that's not what our industry represents. We're smaller family farms, maybe medium at best. And that's where I spoke earlier about my company being an incubator to an automation firm who was trying to get started, couldn't get a foothold. So they were using SR&ED tax credits, but it just wasn't working for them. So we backed them, got them established, made some connections, and now that company several years later has grown significantly. We spoke earlier about strengthening industry academia collaboration. I think that's another important point. And then also access to capital. We talked about AI, and our industry is capital intensive. We need access to capital in order to make significant leaps forwards. And I think that supporting Joe and his initiatives would be helpful as well.
Thanks, Rodney. Kathleen?
Yeah, so a couple things. First of all, I think that if in general we want companies to be investing in R&D, they need to understand that there is a regulatory environment or framework that will accept those products or those processes or the equipment that is being researched and developed. And often we don't have that. Here in Canada, our regulatory systems are not keeping up with new advances in products and even process and equipment design. So I think that's a really important thing. I do think that tax credits are really important for this. I think a lot of companies that are looking at R&D are smaller companies. I'm going to link it to the capital piece as well, because I also think there has to be investment support for capital. I will say there's only one food company in the history of Canada that has ever received a grant under the Strategic Innovation Fund. That was, in fact, Maple Leaf Foods, so I can say that unequivocally. But and we're a pretty large company from a Canadian standpoint. The vast majority of food manufacturers, for example, in this country, wouldn't even come close to being able to qualify for a SIF grant. So I think tax credits really become a great way for smaller and mid-sized companies, even for larger companies, because they're kind of automatic as long as you meet the criteria. You don't have the same reporting requirements that you have if you're looking at federal grant contribution, and those reporting requirements can be quite onerous. And so I think focusing on tax credits is a really great way. I do want to focus on a little bit on the capital investment, though. And I will say, I mean, during the RIP period, there was an announcement from the now Prime Minister, well, then Prime Minister, now new Prime Minister, for a $200 million fund for food processing in Canada. The last scale food plant built in Canada was $800 million, just to give you some perspective. So a $200 fund compared to $2 billion for the auto industry. Auto is a great industry. They're under a lot of pressure right now from the US. They absolutely need support. But guess what? We're actually the largest manufacturing sector in Canada. And it is stunning to me. And I think, again, sort of a demonstration of how little really nobody's trying to get us. No one's out to get us. There's just a really, really low level of understanding of the contribution that this industry and the entire food supply chain, including agriculture, makes to the economy, not just in Canada, but in provinces across the country. And we see that in almost unbelievable announcements that make no sense to people who are in the industry.
Thanks, Kathleen. Steve.
Great. Thank you, Senator. And again, the benefit of going last is everything is said. I want to take look at what one of the things that Rodney mentioned is, again, these ideas of partnerships. And again, I think when we're talking about innovation, we do need to be thinking about how do we de-risk, how do we focus opportunities, and again, leveraging what works in other jurisdictions around the world. Again, that idea of here in Canada, we don't have to create it from scratch. We need to leverage what best practices are out there. Kathleen mentioned it in the case of building the plant and the equipment and everything else, the expertise that industry has. Again, I am a big believer in, and I mentioned it before, that innovation is a team sport. And that ability to form these types of partnerships and leverage the strength that Canada has across the system. Again, we want to talk about, and Kathleen again mentioned this before, agriculture and food is an integrated system. And that strength we have as a system goes back to something Tiffany mentioned, up and down the value chain. And again, that's where I think there's opportunity for us to reimagine how we work. Agriculture, the sector, our sector, food and ag, has for too long been fragmented, either self-inflicted fragmentation, as mentioned before, or by how we divvy up various funding and granting schemes that are targeted. I think we need to be thinking more as that integrated systems-based approach. We need to take a look and say, how does Canada move to be, from where we are today, 7th in food export, back to 5th, close that $44 billion gap? How do we get back to 3rd? Rodney showed we can be number 1 in greenhouses. So again, how do we win? And again, that is something I think we need to kind of almost have a re-mindset and not look at this opportunity as what's in it for me, but what's in it for us. And again, that team-based approach, these collaborative models, other countries are using them to reduce the barrier to entry to enable innovation for companies like Joe and Rodney and others have talked about. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. And I have to say, it catches me off guard when people keep calling me a senator. So please just call me Mary. I keep forgetting to say that. Go for it, Joe.
Yeah, the thing that has really surprised me is innovation. It bubbles up in strange places, like Rodney's greenhouse in Vineland. And so, we need to figure out how. I don't think we're structured properly, working through government and working through universities and working through all that process. We need to unlock the power of our smart people, and then just get out of their way. So the greenhouse sector is a good prime example of that, where lots of entrepreneurs have just hustled and done the 1,000 little things that, over 20, 30, 40 years turns into a sector. So just, I don't expect government to change or fix everything. I'd like if they could help a little bit and then just get out of the way.
I like it, Joe. Ian?
Yeah, I think kind of coming back to the what can be done to help increase investment, and I think there's a lot of different ways signals can be sent. And Kathleen mentioned some, when the way the tax system is set up, the specific regulatory policies, but also there's really high level things the government can do in terms of demonstrating where the wind is blowing. What's the North Star for the country? And I think this addresses one of the questions, or I'll try to, that was in the chat from Rory Francis. And I wonder, Senator Robinson, if that's Rory from PEI, because I know Rory Francis from PEI, and this could be him. But this cycle of, if people say that we need to take economics into consideration, that means we're undervaluing safety, and then people don't want to do it, and you get in this thing. And I agree with that. And that's why politicians shouldn't tell regulatory departments what to do, but they should set targets for the government as a whole. So if gross domestic product increase is the North Star for the government, then you have your primary food safety role in the service of a growing GDP. And that sounds like a very small difference, but it's a huge difference in the context in which that work happens. So it's like, yes, I want to make sure it's safety, but I got to be moving the bar in this direction. When I came into government, and I have fond moments of that, but I was hired in under the Canadian biotech strategy, which was like a late 90s, early 2000s thing. Kathleen she remembers that from back in the day, but that wasn't even money to companies. That was money to the government, a fund from the government to the government departments would compete for grants for who could create policy that would ensure safety while accelerating innovation. And that sent a message to innovators going, oh, Canada's a place to set up shop because they're betting on a winner here, which is biotechnology. They want to see that go forward. And then when the government sets something up like that, other parts of the government go, well, it wouldn't make a ton of sense if we did something that inhibited the thing we just invested in, or you would hope that that's what would kind of happen on the other end. And I think we've done in the last 10 years, we've done some of this. I think we fell off in the last 5 or 6, but PIC is a good example. The government sent a message. This is an area where we want to see wins. The innovation superclusters were an example. It's just, I don't know if it got through the entire last 10 years. I don't know if that same idea was carried forward, but we had some early ideas there where we were trying to send messages that there's some lanes where we want to be world leaders in.
Great, Ian. Steve, I think you're up next.
Great, thank you. I want to build off of something Joe said about a structural problem we have in Canada. And again, it gets down to this idea of scale up. When you look at other jurisdictions, again, I'm a big believer in looking around and what works and then applying it here, is that idea of academia to industry, and especially in the area of ag and food. That's one of the areas that we at the Global Institute for Food Security have been trying to fill by being able to offer scale. But if you look at countries like Germany, they have the Fraunhofer Institutes, which are really that applied science and scale that industry partners with to bring innovations into the marketplace. We really don't have that kind of structure here in Canada to help support that translation from academia to the mid stage of the innovation cycle to get to companies to move forward. So again, I think we do need to take a look at what our innovation strategy is across everything in Canada. It's just exacerbated more, I think, in the ag sector with respect to the challenges of scale up and cost of goods.
Thanks, Steve. Kathleen?
Just really fast. For any of us who've been around for a period of time, you could go to your bookshelf and pull out report upon report upon report from great parliamentary committees and departments, and the themes are all the same across them. I don't think there's any magic here. What we have missed, though, I think, is the commitment to pick a goal and then align around it. Each of these reports, I think back to the last set, and it had a goal, like we were going to be like the biggest exporter or whatever it was, which is great. But what we don't do is follow through and align around it. We don't, and that's not just like align our thinking, it's aligning our policy frameworks, aligning our regulatory frameworks, aligning our funding programs, and we don't do that. And I think if we really want to achieve whatever it is we want to achieve, competitiveness, innovation, exports, whatever it is, it's hard because you have to align all of your programs, policies from a government standpoint and from an industry standpoint around those. And that's hard to do.
And we also have to take into consideration the landing. How big is the landing strip for governments when they start these things? I think you're talking about the Barton report in 2017, which everyone got so excited about. And really, we hit the targets pretty much because of inflation and cost of living increases. So that was really disappointing, I think, for just about everybody in industry. I'm moving on to our final question, and we're going to pose this Tiffany, Joe, and Steve, and then move to the rest of the group. And the final question is, what new opportunities or advantages should Canada exploit in this sector, despite or because of the changing global landscape that'll never waste a crisis? So what new opportunities or advantages should Canada exploit? Tiffany, you kick us off on this one.
Excellent, thank you. So I think number one, there's massive opportunity for Canada right now with some realignment of global alliances and what countries are looking for in partnership. So I think there's an opportunity for Canada to really become a trusted supplier. Countries are moving away from other suppliers that perhaps bring political uncertainty, that aren't as stable. And we're seeing renewed interest, at least from our perspective, in Canada, and opportunity there really to Steve, how do we get back up those that latter, I think that opportunity is in front of us now because Canada looks very appealing. And that's for a lot of reasons. And I think one of them is our climate-friendly ag and the sustainability of our crops or ingredients. I'm going to let Steve talk about that because Gifts has done some really great work that has really showcased Canada's strengths on that. But I think that's an opportunity for us is to really elevate that and leverage that. And the third opportunity is there's been a lot of talk about food security, secure supply chains, and I think the time is now for Canada to take that seriously, both domestic and globally. So let's make the investments. Let's capture that value here at home. Let's increase domestic processing. Let's collaborate along the value chain and really make agriculture and food a strategic priority for Canada. And I think the time is right now. There's a lot of interest. We came through COVID, we came through Russia, Ukraine. We know the vulnerability of our agri-food supply chain, and now with tariffs, I think it's time that we do something about that. Thank you.
Great, Tiffany. Joe.
Yeah, I'm excited about some of the technological innovations coming that are going to impact all of agriculture up and down the supply chain. And I'm thinking of things like artificial intelligence, robotics, data, and the Internet of Things, sensors on everything. And so, those things are coming at us fast and furious. And I'm a bit worried about kind of how we're structured to take on those innovations. Those innovations are typically driven by people and entrepreneurs and founders and people like Rodney and his partners at Bold. And so I think we need an ecosystem approach to helping support those youngish founders and entrepreneurs. And they may not be from agriculture. That's where I'm seeing these bright engineers that can build robotics and software and that know what artificial intelligence is, but they've never been on a farm. So how we can build structure and process around them, I think is really quite important. Part of that's going to be capital, part of that's going to be R&D, all those things. And I don't think our current system is geared to supporting, bringing those innovations to market. And it'll be a real shame if the Canadian economy doesn't have a sector that can do some of that stuff. I do see some people helping and trying to help stimulate that. Farm Credit Canada is putting together a capital pool to take advantage of some of these opportunities. So that group's new and it's scaling up. They've also invested in innovation farm networks. So they're starting to put footprints where they can test out things like technology. Kane is doing some good stuff, which is SIF or some of the ISED grants. OMAFA in Ontario has funded the Agribotics Working Group. So I think they see that the system's not structured properly and they're trying and they're experimenting. I think we just need to do it with more scale, and hopefully we'll have some great companies that emerge out of the opportunity.
Thanks, Joe. I'm going to go to Steve, and then after Steve, we'll go to Rodney. Steve?
Okay, great. Thank you. So I'm just full disclosure, I'm a rational optimist, and I am excited about the opportunity that is in front of us. Because again, as you mentioned, Mary, I didn't call you senator, that you never want to waste a good crisis. I do believe here in Canada that we have tremendous strengths. As Tiffany mentioned, we're one of the lowest carbon footprint producers of food, even though food is carbon. Ours has less bad carbon and more good carbon across all the crops that we've had a chance to look at here at the Global Institute of Security. One thing that I think is the power that we offer is being able to leverage new ways to innovate. And again, that partnership piece, because again, Joe mentioned new young founders. How do we start to not only help innovations come through down the path to impact, but how do we create those environments and teaching and mentoring opportunities for our innovators? How do we enable them to play? Because again, innovation is it doesn't always work. And right now I will show you, this is an innovation that worked beautifully technically, got regulatory approval, got a manufacturing plant built, and it failed commercially. I keep this on my desk. Why? Because it reminds me of why you need to be looking across this whole systems-based approach to bring innovations forward. I come from industry. I've had the last 5 years here at the Global Institute for Food Security, and I came back to Canada because of the strength of the ecosystem, because of the strength of our entire sector. And I am a big believer in partnerships to bring innovation forward, like accelerated breeding and biomanufacturing. So again, I see real opportunity for growth. I think what Kathleen said in the last comment, we need to pick a plan, and we need to not only have a plan, but we need to execute against the plan. The Barton report, we might have hit the numbers, but what we didn't have was, how do we implement this thing, and how do we drive that execution? Because a plan is good, but useless if you don't follow through. So that's where I think we have a real opportunity here to really reimagine how we bring innovation forward.
Love the rational optimist. Thanks, Steve. We're going to go to Rodney and then Ian.
Yeah, I love what Joe and Steve said. And just, I mean, Steve kind of scrambled all my thoughts now, but Joe, speaking to your point, we have a young co-op student at Bold Robotics right now, and he called me. He said, "What can I do for you?" And I'm like, "Well, what do you do?" He's like, "Well, I can, he basically gave me a little background. I said, "Well, I had this idea in my head for the past few years, and I just haven't had the right person to put it together for me." And it's a very simple thing. We take a lot of cuttings worldwide, billions of cuttings. Vegetative cuttings are taken a year of plants, and I said, I want a pail that counts, and I want it uploaded to the cloud. I want it, specific to each one of my employees, so I know what they're doing, and it sets some goals for them as well. And he turned it around within a week. Web page, everything beautiful, right? So, just speaking to Joe and Steve, there are some great young minds here. We just need to point them in the right direction, and I think they can accomplish a lot.
Thanks, Rodney. Ian, I'm going to give you 24 seconds.
Yeah, I think in terms of opportunities right now, I think we got very used to north-south trade, and all of our regulatory harmonization was focused on that. Might be a lack of harmonization coming in the States in the near future with some food movements and RFK and what he might bring there. So I think the opportunity is internationally and bilaterally for regulatory harmonization with other markets, things we should have been working on anyway. But there's ways to accelerate our regulatory system and align with others. So there was a question in the chat about that, regulatory harmonization can often take decades to get figured out. That comes down to political motivation. If the country puts a priority on harmonizing with other countries in terms of regulatory approaches, it can happen overnight. We can quickly find ways to do this if we choose. So I think there's a real opportunity there. The last piece I'll say is and this is a totally personal Ian Affleck point of view, and this is my annoyance at the US right now. It's like they want to steal our auto plants. Auto plants are very hard to pick up and move. Like, they take time. It's a lot to build. You know what isn't hard to move? A laboratory. Bench laboratory moves real quick. So if we are a science-based country that's sending out those signals that we are a stable, sane, science-based regulatory country, it doesn't take a lot to move a lab from Seattle to Vancouver. So there's a great amount of intellectual capacity that is open for business, depending on how things go in this unstable global climate that we're kind of moving into. So regulatory harmonization and intellectual theft that's not IP, more human.
Thanks, Ian. That was worth the additional beyond 24 seconds. Thank you for your response. Okay, we've gone through our 4 questions. So next, everybody's going to see a demographic poll launch, I think, on their screen. And this is, if you could take some time to fill this out, that would be great. Useful information. There it is for our hosts, as this is the first of their series. That'd be great. And I wanted to remind everybody to upvote if they see a question that they want answered. Please upvote that question. So we are now going to move into the Q&A. Let's see if I can do this. I think, I could do with okay, we can sort by most upvotes. So let's do that. Okay, so we are going to start with Jean's question. Seems that this panel will only talk about agriculture. To me, agri-food includes all protein. So why is the fish and seafood sector totally out of the discussion? So that's an interesting question. Anybody here have fish or seafood in their repertoire? If not, what I can say is definitely, as past president of the Canadian Federation of Agriculture, the Canadian Aquaculture and Industry Alliance joined the CFA specifically for this reason. And it is because typically our government, and obviously us, don't recognize the fish farmers as farmers. They tend to recognize them as fishers. But thank you so much. You would do my friend Cyr Couturier very proud having asked that question. I'll move down to the next one. As an individual working on connecting Canadian agri producers to international markets, I have noticed that the supply chain infrastructure could use some work. Cheaper freight costs would make us very competitive in markets such as South Asia and Middle East. Are there any opportunities to improve on this front via regulations and or government programs? Anyone like to answer this one?
I can take a brief swing at it. I think this comes back to Kathleen had mentioned there's all kinds of reports on the shelves of things that can be done. There was a transportation and infrastructure report delivered in 22 to the government. It was presented to the agricultural sector, and we just haven't actioned it. I think there's a bunch of actionable items in there. We just need to choose to do it and build ports and reinforce rail, and it's there. But people have to ask for it to be done. Reports don't fulfill themselves. Reports provide a draft by which people can go in behind them and say, yes, do that report. That's important.
So we need to upvote it within our message to government. Yeah. I think, Joe, and I missed it. I think Ian and Tiffany, did you both have your hands up to answer the fish question? Did anybody want to weigh in there before we move on to finish
I can
this
jump
question?
in quick. And I think I'm from Saskatchewan. I'm not going to talk about oceans and fisheries, but I think we can talk about the impact of the work across the sector. So one of the biggest investments that Protein Industries Canada has made is specific for the aquaculture market, and it's really into canola, but it really talks about the linkages between all the sector and how innovation across the value chain can really bring benefits across. So I think it's a great pickup is, maybe there's more room for whether it's aquaculture or livestock around this conversation, but there is opportunity and innovation from, the canola fields in Saskatchewan to benefit the aquaculture sector on the East Coast. Absolutely.
Thanks, Tiffany. Okay, I'm going to move on to finishing the second question. I think, Joe, you had your hand up first in response to this one.
Yeah, I think I hear people, we've got to get our costs down and get our commodities moving. I hate that countries like China can hammer us and knock out billions of dollars of value with a tariff or some sort of blockage on oil or the feed or whatever. So, how do we get away from that? I think it's the processing, it's the value adding, it's the, sending higher, instead of bulk seed or bulk commodities, find intellectual property, find ways where we can process the crops so that we're selling finished goods versus raw commodities that can just get hammered. I think adding value is more important than knocking out costs. I know it's easy to say but hard to do, but intellectual property and things like that, I think we need to focus more of our effort on.
Thanks, Joe. Kathleen?
I fully agree with Ian's statement that there's been so many reports done on what needs upgrading from an infrastructure standpoint that I think it's been thought through. Having said that, I think infrastructure is a really hard one for governments to take on for two reasons. One, it tends to be large, sometimes massive investments. And those investments, if they're made, take sometimes decades to materialize or see the benefits of. And that can be really hard for governments to message that they are actually doing things and making investments, because the people actually complaining don't see it. I think the other reason infrastructure is really hard is because often what we're talking about in infrastructure is labor disruptions. And it comes down to the question of, how do governments regulate unionized workplaces, right? And what is that tension and that balance here? And we, of course, my belief is our plants are all unionized. And I think that opens up some really hard questions. I think those really hard questions need to be tackled. I don't pretend to have the answers to them. I don't think that labor rights should be trampled. By the same token, I think if we really are serious that we want to have an exporting country that goes beyond the US, we're going to have to deal with this somehow. And I think there has to be a conversation about that. And perhaps that's just too sensitive for governments to take on. But I think that's part of what the challenge is. The other thing I'll just quickly add is that we are obviously a processing company, and we've been subjected to a tariff from China as well. So the value added, I think, is a good way to go, because I think it keeps the production here in Canada. It doesn't always make you immune from the trade actions.
Thanks, Kathleen and Joe. I'm going to move on to a question from Rory Francis, who I think is our Rory from PEI. Regulatory agencies will say that consumer safety is their only concern, not economic development. We talked a little bit about this. Politicians fear pressing change on regulatory risk policy. They fear pressing change on regulatory risk policy, lest they are blamed for a problem that might be linked to those changes. How do we escape this trap? And I think, Ian, you kind of talked about this, and I've heard Pierre Patel certainly talk about this kind of risk-averse approach, and the idea that we don't believe in science, that we believe in political pressure. So, Kathleen, do you want to answer first? Is that your hand up?
It is, and I don't want to answer it. I think it's true. I mean, I think it is I was around during BSE, and I watched how folks at CFA were treated during that period. And I think it is true that sometimes our hardworking government officials, I think their trepidation is sometimes well earned. I think sometimes when things go wrong, the accountability, the responsibility is pushed down on them, and that's not always appropriate. And I think that has helped to create a culture where we have a regulatory group that is more risk averse. And I think that has been, I think, a legitimate and natural response to some of the circumstances that these government officials have been put in. So I do want to put that out there, because I have seen that through my career. I think ultimately you're talking about a culture change, and a culture change, I think, is the hardest change to make. And I think that is, at the end of the day, what we're dealing with is, how do you take a regulatory group within governments who have a particular approach and a particular culture for good reasons, and try to shift that to something else. And that is going to require a very focused and, I think, sustained effort.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I might just back to that, what Kathleen said. I fully agree, and I think it comes from the very top and having a really clear goal as a government. Not necessarily, like, there's part of it is culture within departments, but part of it, if the goal of the government in general is really clear, then the departments will start to organize themselves around that goal, and there's really talented people within those departments, and they will figure that out. But maybe this is a political statement, but if the goal of the government appears to be, we don't like bad press, then departments will slowly over time form themselves around, we don't want to be in the newspaper, versus other potential goals. So I'm showing my hand about where I think we may have gone over the last few years, but like, that's the bravery that comes with it. If the North Star is very clear and they'll be defended for going that direction, they'll make safety the priority in service of the larger goal. But it takes, these are like tanker ships. You can't turn these things around overnight. Like, it's a slow and long process to adjust. And to a certain extent, and I don't know, Kathleen, how you said, like, you want government to move quickly, but it's also not supposed to move that quickly, because you don't want it to knee jerk and overreact. Yeah. So it's like, it's this mix between, we want to go quick, but you can't expect it to move too quick, because that's the whole point. It's supposed to be well thought out and thorough. So it's a real balancing act, but North Star is the first thing.
It's the goal.
I do have to add, Sorry, if I could just add really quickly, I have had some phenomenal conversations with our regulatory agency, CFIA, in the past sort of 18 months that were really about how do they maintain their regulatory obligations, but recognize that there may be different ways of going about it, and one way may cause economic harm and another doesn't, or causes less economic harm. And we have found folks who get it and who want to try to sort of move more that way when the regulations allow them to do it. So it's not always black and white.
Rodney, you're trying to get in here.
Yeah, I mean, just speaking to Kathleen on cultural change, I think we've seen that happen in CFIA in terms of plant regulation over the past few years, where we've seen sort of the shift from where farmers were experienced legitimate fear in terms of being regulated to more of a engaging approach. So I think it's possible. I'm always looking for those examples of where that can work, and I think that's something we've experienced, and we've been able as an industry to engage with CFIA and work together with them in developing new frameworks that where there's a certain amount of comfort level.
Thanks. I'm probably coming from Prince Edward Island. I might say that I have definitely heard a relatively high level of dissatisfaction with the engagement between CFIA and the PEI potato sector as we navigated the potato wart situation here in PEI. So, Rodney, I'm happy to hear that you've seen some cultural shift, and I think there's opportunity for a whole lot more of that within CFIA. Moving on to our next upvoted question, and it's an anonymous attendee to the panel. As the founder of an early stage ag robotics company in Canada, I'm interested in understanding how startups like ours can best navigate the current geopolitical and supply chain challenges. What practical steps should we be taking, and where do you see the greatest opportunities for support, whether through policy, partnerships, or investment, to help us scale and succeed in this evolving landscape? Rodney, you're quick to the button.
Yeah, kind of a smart ass answer, but don't be anonymous. Share your name, and then we can definitely work with you. That would be a start.
Super. Okay, Joe.
I told this to a great ag tech entrepreneur named Chuck Barisic, who started Haggerty Ag Robotics a few years ago. I told him, go slowly. Because it's easy to spend money, get out over your skis, and the market's not quite there yet. And so we try to support these really smart young founders, but it's hard. There's no commercial market for the most part today, and so they're going to have to live off of grants, or if they can raise capital investment, probably not in Canada. They have a chance of building out, but really they have to just be close to the farmer and work with people like Rodney and just understand. So we have done one thing in Ontario that's worked out well. We've formed what's called the Ag Robotics Working Group. It's a free once a week webinar where people can get on there and share and talk about things, and we try to find resources and grants and connect them with the right folks. So that's a free webinar. If you go to the website, or you can send a note to me and we can get you signed up for free. And just trying to help the ecosystem to help those young. We talked about planting trees earlier. It's about planting a tree. The first few years, you've got to water them and keep the weeds down. And then maybe 6-7 years down the road, you'll see, hey, there's an apple. So that's the analogy that we try to use. And don't try not to go too fast, because it's a hard slug.
Right. It's a distance to go, a marathon to run. We're going to try to squeeze in one last question before we wrap up our Q&A, and that's from Kelly Somerville. How can industry start to address the regulatory burden, and what are the impacts of this burden on research funding and priority setting? You've stumped them, Kelly. Oh, Ian.
Maybe I say I think historically, and Senator, you were involved in this when you were with CFA. I think the way we've seen success in the past is around what Kathleen said. It's organization. You got to get your partners in order, get a clear proposal for government, take it to them with a wide range of people involved. The example I would give on gene editing for Canada and the plant side, Canada now has a world-leading regulatory framework for gene editing. Now, maybe it took us 10 years when it should have taken us 3 to get that done, but hey, it got done in the end. But I mean, almost everyone on this call was involved at some point in the development of the material. From Kathleen, I think you were involved 10 or 12 years ago when we started the research into the regulatory structures around the world and how they needed to evolve. So it's kind of, if you want to make change, it's not going to be a single meeting from a single party. And if you can align your value chains, and I think this goes back to others have said this, and Kathleen mentioned it, is you're not just the producer that's going to use the product or is going to commercialize the product. The person that's going to plant it, and the person's going to harvest it and ship it, and the person's going to process it. If you can get all of those voices in line that, yes, we need this product and we need a system that will allow it to exist, that's going to make your case much, much stronger. And that's how we got the gene editing file over the line, was an alignment of ag sector colleagues. So I think it's build your coalitions first and then go in with a clear proposal. That's the best advice that I can give.
And have patience. It sounds like 3 versus 10 years. That apple you plucked must have been pretty sweet tasting in after all that.
I don't know if it's an example of how I'm not good at my job or if it's an example of that I'm persistent, but we're going to take it as persistence is the example. But and also fill into that North Star. Like the government's looking to set a North Star right now. So be heard. Read the speech from the throne. Read the mandate letters. Look at the platform. Like speak up and get involved. Write your MP. Like don't be anonymous, as Rodney would say.
Excellent. Steve, you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I think as it relates to the question from a research perspective, the other piece that I would add in there, in addition to the regulatory environment, is the intellectual property environment. And one thing that I think we could do a much better job of is helping the entire ecosystem, academia, government, and industry, understand what the path to impact is, not just on the regulatory side, but also on the IP side. And when we think about research funding, even having a conversation about that forces folks to start to make those connections. Because again, we need innovation. The problems that we face today aren't going to be solved with yesterday's technology. It's new technologies and new tools that we need. And again, I think that idea of the path to impact and thinking about regulatory and IP, I think are really important to build in and educate our entire ecosystem.
Super. Okay, I think that wraps up our Q&A. That was great. Thank you, everybody. And I think now we'll move into closing remarks. And I just wanted to start by saying thank you so much to our panelists. It was great that you were able to make the time to be here. And I hope for our audience that we have fulfilled our mandate, which we set out to be to offer a thought-provoking and stimulating conversation to get us all thinking about how we can. I think right now we're in a situation where we should be reaching for the brass ring. It is a time, it is that crisis. We see a change of government. We see a definite shift in how I think how agriculture and agri-food, and in particular aquaculture, can be perceived. And I think we should be really being that rational optimist and having a run at it right now. So I wanted quickly some of the thoughts that I took. I highlighted a couple points. And when we had our first question, there was a lot of talk about how investment venture capital really has been frozen because of the uncertainty. When we get into the second question, I really thought like that message of safety first in the mission of delivering food security. Like we've got to keep from a regulatory perspective, to lose sight of that we have food security and also an economic opportunity here. Steve, we heard you say several times, innovation is a team sport. And I think everybody's got to start looking around at the entire supply chain, not as competitors, but as team members. We have to pass the puck along the chain. So we need each link in that chain to really be at its best. I really appreciated, Rodney, when you made the point that the investment made by the greenhouse sector, I think you said every 5 years is the equivalent of an automated plant being built, and how we just don't recognize or celebrate that. That is mind-boggling. Again, we got team sport out of Steve. Ian, you talked a lot about North Stars, and I think, yeah, we need to see government really sending that message to industry and to our investors that that they finally are going to pull off the shelf, Kathleen, that Dusty report, the Barton report, and start to really have a look at some of the opportunities, that unpolished gem that Barton and his crew really identified back in 2017. Tiffany, really appreciated your note on a trusted supplier. And within that, I certainly have seen a lot of discussion around transportation. And when we look at how we get our grains and pulses to market, and how we see, our primary production as well as the other parts of the value chain being kind of held hostage, whether it be rail or port or what have you, and that really just destroys our credibility when we go out in the international market. And Joe, your point about, are we structured to take on these innovations? I really liked how you walked us through thinking about that. And I think we, as we all leave this session and figure out how we're going to action on what we've learned, and try to figure out how we can each put our shoulder to the wheel on this, I think having a look at how we're structured, and that for sure, the brain power that exists in this country, and how so much of it is outside agriculture, doesn't know the opportunities that exist in agriculture. And Rodney, I would love to know more about your example of your billion cuttings. So I think we need to be looking at that and finding ways to reach out to those players. And in a lot of this, I've heard a resounding silent reaffirmation that the Center for Food Integrity does good work. And I would encourage anybody that doesn't know about CCFI, the Canadian Center for Food Integrity, to have a look at them and to see how we can better empower them to help send the message across the entire economy, the entire country, about how agriculture and agri-food, next to government in Canada, is the largest employer in this country. So it's time we start to see some people outside of our communities aware of that and proud of it. And with that, I want to thank the crowd at CSPC for pulling this together and inviting me to take part. It's been an absolute pleasure and honor, and I will pass it back to Mehrdad.
Thank you very much, Senator. That was really one of the most insightful panels that we have had at CSPC, and we have a lot of good panels, by the way, but this was certainly an outstanding one. Thanks to you, and thanks to all panelists who provided really, really meaningful and insightful conversations and discussions and points that there is so much to learn, and there is so much to follow up on this. Just for the audience, that the series of virtual webinars will continue mainly through the fall, with other sectors. We'll present the same questions, will be tabled to them, and all the sessions will be recorded, posted online and will be promoted on social media channels. And the summary of these will be generated and will be posted online, will be presented at the Science Policy Conference November 19 to 21st in Ottawa at the Symposium on Innovation Strategy. There is a feedback poll that is launched. I appreciate if you could please take 5 seconds to answer this, simply 2 questions. And if you want to provide comments, by all means, please do so. This is very helpful for us to see how we can do better in future. And by the way, I just want to make sure that a lot of new audiences at CSPC, that we have the editorial version of the strategic innovation strategy will be published soon. The opportunity is there for everyone to submit an editorial piece, an opinion piece, and I think the link will be posted on the chat. Feel free to submit that editorial. I believe the deadline, if it's not extended, is June 4th so far. And also, For some of you who may not know, we have the awards, Trailblazer Awards on Innovation Policy, on Science Policy, on Science and Society. So since the crowd is relevant to innovation policy, I recommend police submit nominations for Trailblazer Awards on Innovation Policy. The recipient will be acknowledged and celebrated at the gala dinner of the Science Policy Conference in November in Ottawa. With that, I want to thank you all for your patience and being with us, all the panelists, and Senator, once again, thank you for taking the leadership role for this panel. Very much looking forward to stay engaged and connected with all of you. Thank you.